Legacy. It's what you pass down to your children, and to your children's children. It's what remains of you when you're gone. Many hope to create it. Many more hope to live up to it. Very few ever succeed. The legacy of this show hopes to be about what Westeros means to us, and what we hope it may mean to a new generation of fans, and the generation after that. Boasting discussions that will endure, passions that will rise, debates that will make the small council jealous. With a combined 44 years of experience behind a microphone, the hosts and guest hosts of this show are dedicated to the fans' experience interviewing anything from Westeros, Essos, and beyond. This group is not the house of a lion, a direwolf, or even a dragon. This is a fraternity, a lineage, a house that endures beyond sigils, and aims to leave a legacy no other podcast has. So it's time to call the Banos, for this is the House of the Empire.
Hey, what's up, everybody? It's time for another episode of House of the Dragon coming to you here on Fandom Empire. Well, should be House of the Dragon discussion. I listened to that whole outro and I still screwed up the introduction. One of those nights, obviously. So it's a House of the Dragon discussion on the show House of the Empire. And the reason that guy over there is laughing is because he didn't realize I screwed up until I pointed it out. I bet it was going to be glossed over by everybody. And then I had to call myself out. So, Johnny, this is shaping a fun night. Just the two of us on the talk tonight, and I've already screwed it up, and it's only 3 minutes in.
It's definitely going to be fun. I mean, I did notice. I just didn't want to point it out in case you just glossed over it, and then I'd laugh at you once we were done recording. But,
yeah,
as soon as you open the door, I'm just like, well, okay, I can openly laugh now. Well, it's going to be fun.
You're going to walk right through it.
Yeah. No, it's going to be fun. I mean, we're not, we're going to miss a little something just being the two of us. We're not going to have quite as much back and forth as we usually get with 3 or 4 people, because then you get, 4 differing opinions always makes everything a little more lively. But, we'll do our best to keep it fun, keep it, interesting, and live up to the standards that the House of the Empire likes to provide weekly.
Well, if it's anything like the standards I just said a few minutes ago, that's not very telling. So, we'll see. We'll see. Tonight's discussion is on episode 4, King of the Narrow Sea. We had a really epic fight sequence at the end of the 3rd episode. We felt like it was going to be setting the stage for a lot of things in this 4th episode. Obviously, kind of around 5 and 6 is when we're expecting the really, really big stuff to hit the fan. And so I was going into this with, I wouldn't say like a dewy-eyed impression, but I was hopeful for what this episode would be accomplished, because we only have a little bit of time left with Millie Alcock. We've only got a little bit of time left with this dynamic before the time jump, and I was really hoping that they would make the most of it, and I feel like they did. Had some really, really good scenes with important players from this first half of the season, and it led to a lot more character development than I was expecting, and they did it in ways that I guess I shouldn't, yet at the same time I didn't. I'm trying to like a little spoiler free off the top, but I was very intrigued by that this episode was executed, I guess, is my first thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I can definitely agree with that. It's just feeling like I'm enjoying the heck out of this show. And, I'm loving the pacing and the tone and the way they're telling the story, because, like I've said, we've had this discussion on the shows before that, I know the lore, I know the history. So, generally I know the steps, I know the stages. So I know when things get changed from the book, and the previously established lore to the TV series. So, I can sort of play out the events in my mind, and okay, we're here, so this is what's generally, this is what's going on in Westeros right now. Let's see how it plays out. And so far, everything has pretty much played out the way I knew it would play out. You know, I mean, yes, we aged up Rhaenyra in this for the purpose of the series, which uh, makes I both don't like it and understand it. I guess is the correct way to put it, because you can't really play the Daemon Rhaenyra dynamic properly if Rhaenyra is age appropriate in those first few episodes. So I understand it.
Mhm.
I've gotten over it. It's no longer an issue for me because we're back up into more age appropriate time periods. So everything looks right. Millie Alcock is pulling off the look of Rhaenyra at this time in her life. Being about to be wed to her second cousin. I think Laenor would be her third, fourth, something like that. I mean, they're cousins, but it's not
So
immediate. It's not first cousin, but it's one of those weirder,
I,
more further family tree ones,
I think
right? Because
I think it's probably like
Rhaenys and
third cousin
Viserys are
because her
cousins, so that would be
they are cousins, which would make second cousins for Rhaenyra and Rhaenys. And then
yes.
Rhaenys'
Third?
child would make it Rhaenyra's third cousin. I think we're at third cousins
Okay.
then.
All right. So I mean, let's be real. It's Targaryen, so that is irrelevant. But it's factual.
Mhm.
So I'm okay with this at this point.
Right.
The casting is. I mean, Millie said just performed phenomenally well. I mean, I have no gripes about the performance of the story or anything like that. So I got over that issue pretty quick, and I'm enjoying it. But it's starting to feel more and more like, and this is just me purely saying this from a standpoint of being a viewer, is that they probably should have just bulk dropped the first 6. Because everyone is expecting these events, and everyone is expecting. Everybody knows that. I don't want to be spoilery because there are some people that have absolutely zero idea of anything. So, if you know the lore, you know that a certain event is coming, and that's where this story truly begins.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I'd say it's fairly
it even
obvious to anyone at this point what I'm talking about, but I know there are some people who don't know that and who don't necessarily know the event to which I'm referring. So, I mean, I'm going to stay vague and say that something is going to happen where the story will truly begin. That's still a ways out yet. Is that the 6th episode, or is that, the end of the first season?
it
I
might.
truly don't know at this point. So,
Well, I mean, 6 and 7 are going to be directed by Sapochnik, and given
Mhm.
his track record of Game of Thrones episodes that he directs, I think it would stand to reason that that's probably when everything really does hit the fan. Because even
That's
for those
also when we
who
get the
haven't
age up, right?
watched the show, it should be. Yeah, I believe it's either at 6 or between 6 and 7 that we get it. So
Yeah.
it would stand to reason that that is where like some of the biggest moments are going to happen. And even those who haven't done any of the reading, who don't know a whole lot of the lore, it's pretty obvious what is on its way, just given the tension and the attention that's going towards the throne. So like even people who have seen like the episode 5 preview, my
Mhm.
fiance and I watched it like 3 times in a row, just kind of like taking the pause button second by second, almost frame by frame, in order to be like, okay, this is where I think this is, and this is who I think this is, and oh, that is so and so from this episode previous, and like we're trying to put the pieces together just based off of 60 seconds of data,
Mhm.
to get ourselves ready for the next week as well. And I really think that 4 is one of those continuing foundation builders, which is kind of what all of these first 4 episodes have been. They have just
Mhm.
been laying the groundwork, laying the groundwork, laying the groundwork. But I really think 5 could end up being the spark, and 4 is kind of the, what do you call it? The trail of gunpowder. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? Where
Yep.
you're kind of like, as soon as it lights, things are headed towards the explosion. I think that
Mhm.
trail of gunpowder is probably one of the descriptions I could think of for King of the Narrow Sea,
We're gonna
which
light
is
the
what
fuse.
what our primary discussion.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Why I was thinking of Muppet Treasure Island, where they have the cork out of the barrel of gunpowder, and they're just running from the pirates, chasing up and down the place, and the spark keeps following them, and then they finally like
I
drop
mean,
the
a
barrel
run
and
of
run, and
gunpowder is technically a fuse, so it just it paints it much
Mhm.
more easy to follow picture for young generations who are like, "What is gunpowder?"
Nobody knows. Nobody knows anymore. They don't look at that kind of thing, and that is one thing I will say that I feel we may have missed out on a little bit. I personally was rather invested in this campaign for the Stepstones, and
Mhm.
I wish that we could have had a seafaring battle because that was one thing we didn't get a whole lot of in Game of Thrones, and I feel like the opportunity was definitely there during this campaign. And who maybe it'll show up, some other point later on in the series. But I, on the topic of gunpowder, would have loved to have seen something like that. And going into spoilers, we'll go ahead and start discussing some of the spoilers. The episode almost opens with Damon's return from the Stepstones. We go from
Well, I mean, I'd say like
his clinching victory.
I think the courting of Rhaenyra is a
I
bit
think
more
we
important off the top because that's before Daemon's return.
it it can be, yes, and I feel like there
Well,
may be a little
just
bit of a lag between us. So
perhaps a little bit. Just to me, that beginning, like I said, I know the lore, I know the books, and the duel with Lord Blackwood and Lord Bracken is something that's actually openly talked about in the lore and the history. So actually getting to see that duel play out and how it affected, and I'll be honest. If there's one thing I'm weak on in Game of Thrones, it's sort of the crest of the lesser houses. Like the more noble
mhm.
houses, of course. I can spot a Targaryen or a Lannister or a Baratheon or a Stark or you know uh, a Bolton. I guess is a pretty pretty easy to notice sigil. But some of those
Mm,
lesser houses, I never quite competent with the sigils. So actually getting to see that duel play out and which one's which, and it was fun. I like that, and it sets the table for Rhaenyra's story in a big way going forward that I liked. And getting strafed on Dragonback was also fun. I enjoyed that because it told you what was about to happen without telling you what was about to happen. You see
mhm.
Caraxes, and that's like, oh, Daemon's back. And then we
Yeah, you
get
never you never see Matt Smith in that scene, but it still tells a story, paints a picture, and
very much
I,
so.
I I'll agree. I guess I just get excited about Matt Smith a little bit. I guess he's been the scene stealer for me, and so I just want to start talking about him. But I'll agree that her tour being cut short is very telling of just who Rhaenyra's personality is. Like, not only was she not thrilled with this arrangement, but she was so not thrilled with it that she cuts it off like 2 months early. And this is
Mhm.
something that probably is rather unprecedented in the realm. This touring of the kingdoms, touring of the castles to meet potential suitors in person, make your appeal to your beau in person. Um, just judging by how male driven the society has been up to this point, there's probably never been an event quite like this in the Seven Kingdoms. And even when she's making history, Rhaenyra still gets tired of it and decides to leave.
Yeah. I mean, I think this is, going back to the point of, knowing what is it. I think this is the first time where we're likely going to diverge from the timeline in a I don't want to say a large fashion, but sort of we're going to put one major event before another major event and change the order. I think it's I mean, now of course they may not. This is House of the Dragon, so time isn't quite as linear, so the events could still happen in the same order just over the span of one episode. But it does seem likely that we're setting up to flip events, and I don't think it's not story change, like it's not lore changing in any major form or fashion. It's just flipping two events by one event happens in 1 year, one event happens the following year, and it seems like we're about to flip those two events, and I don't know. It's comes down. It's going to come down to the execution, but to me, it looks that way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, let's talk about execution, because there was a lot of technical execution that needed to be accomplished in this episode, along with some storytelling execution, as far as how to develop certain characters like Damon and Alicent, and how you're going to shoot some contrasting scenes where I think one of the things that stood out to me the most was, how duty bound Alicent was in some of her scenes. Not long after her discussion with Rhaenyra, mind you, the two paths converged for just a little while at the party, and then they go completely different directions. Alicent is very honor bound and duty driven. Her roles and expectations as queen, and then you get the exact opposite of Rhaenyra basically going on the equivalent of a joyride, and just gets to see the sights of the town, gets to experience things from a commoner's perspective, and to see them alternating back and forth in those sequences
Mhm.
was, in my opinion, much better storytelling than what we'd gotten previously. Because I complained a couple episodes ago about how you had the sandwich storytelling, where one storyline's happening on either end and
Mhm.
then something else happening right in the
Yep.
middle. The alternating scenes going back and forth, showing the contrast of characters, was really, really well done, I think.
Yeah, but that's what made it different, right? Instead of like you said, we've had the sandwich in other episodes where one story is another story, and then they just meet in the middle somewhere. This one was sort of simultaneous stories in a way that while you flipped back and forth, it wasn't. They were meeting at a mountain peak, not a squished together in the center type way, which I thought was some great
Hmm.
storytelling because it told a great story, from start to finish in this episode. And again, like you said, you get to see sort of that the interaction of the characters in such a way that makes future events so much more interesting because like Sean likes to point out on this, the history, the lore that we know is told from the perspective of the maesters, so we don't know how much of it's actually true, how much of it's happened as accurately, and how much of it is painted by the maesters. So it's interesting to see how it plays out, knowing that George is involved in this, and this is his story. We're not diverging, cutting out characters. We're just telling the story fully. And I like the relationship, the way they're weaving and bobbing and telling us these different characters, especially Alicent, the character. When you read the lore and the history, you get an image of her, and it is very different. Like to me, in my head, reading the lore and learning the history, she was more of a Cersei type character. She played the game, and you actually see the character in reality, and she's not playing the game, not for herself.
Mm.
And it's interesting because this paints a much different picture than what we got. This is Cersei trying to help Marcella, not Cersei trying to help Cersei. So
Mm.
it's very different than the image I painted in my head, and the relationship is very different than the image that I painted in my head. Although the image painted in my head was based on the ages, so the to me anyway, you keep seeing the sexual tension between the two characters that in the books, nope, not happening because there's a 10-year age difference between the two, whereas now I think we're at like 3 years between the two, so it's much more a friendly relationship where they're close in age. They're peers, not mother daughter. So it allows for
Hmm.
that you know unrequited sexual tension, which is making the relationship so much better. It's adding so much more to future events, and personally, I love it.
Yeah, I caught some of that during the scene in the Godswood. I still
Mhm.
don't understand for the life of me why that's there. I still don't understand why they spend so much damn time in the Godswood. I don't
Mhm.
get it. But we've gotten some pretty interesting scenes out of there from a romantic sexual tension perspective. It was that way in the first episode, that way in this episode. There's a lot of very poignant and oftentimes discreet conversations that happen in this Godswood.
Yeah, very much
And
so.
correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think this Godswood exists at the time of Ned Stark arriving in season 1 of the original Game of
No,
Thrones.
we know that
So
at some point in the lore. Now, it was assumed that it was in the time of Aegon that all of the Godswoods south of it's further south than Winterfell, but not quite to the Riverlands. I think if my geography is accurate, I'd have to actually look at a map, but it's somewhere around like the top third of Westeros, and they cut all the Godswoods down south of that. So there are no Godswoods in King's Landing by the time of this. And I thought it was prior to this. Obviously, there's at least one still standing. Or, we're gonna find out it's Bran
so
watching through a tree in the
I'm
season
trying I'm,
finale or series finale.
oh god, I hope not. I really hope not.
I still think
Um
there's a legitimate chance we get to the
maybe
series finale and it's Bran telling the story of the fall of the Targaryen dynasty.
in, instead of the Maesters.
But yeah, I don't want it
I
to be that
mean,
way, but
I guess how
now he's telling the
much
truth
of
because
this
it paints a very
universe they're
different
trying
picture. Yeah.
to. Mm-hmm. So, somewhere around the neck, I would imagine the neck of the twins. I was just looking
That
at a
could be.
map, trying to.
I
Google.
think that's that's between Winterfell and the river or in the Riverlands, I think. So I mean, unless my
I think the
geography is
neck is kind of
horrible.
that half. I mean, my Earth geography is terrible, so don't try to get me started on Westeros geography.
Yeah, fair enough.
It's not going to happen. But going back to interesting conversations that happened in the Godswood, there were at least 3 of them that happened in this episode. One of them was between Alicent and Rhaenyra, where Alicent kind of expresses that she feels lonely in the capital and was glad to have Rhaenyra back. Not long after that, Rhaenyra confronts her uncle, asking him why he's actually back. She doesn't believe him for a minute that he misses the comforts of King's Landing and trying to call him out on it. And I'm actually kind of glad that they had this conversation in High Valyrian. They
Yeah.
maintained this idea that you are preserving your history by speaking your own native tongue. And I am engaged to a young lady who's Hispanic, and she speaks Spanish with her family quite often. And it reminds me of how speaking it is the best way to preserve your tongue. You got to
Mm.
speak it. You got to practice. And the fact that they make this like an all English show, and they expect you to keep up with certain plot points in another language was really interesting to me, especially in this conversation.
I look forward to it. Eventually, I think to this point, everything that's been said in Old Valyrian has had subtitles. I think eventually there's going to be a conversation of consequence in High Valyrian that we're not going to get subtitles for. It's going to be a scene where like Alicent is eavesdropping on, let's say Rhaenyra and Daemon. And they're having a conversation in Old Valyrian. We're seeing the scene from Alicent's perspective, so we don't get the subtitles. But anyone who speaks Old Valyrian, because obviously people do speak it in amongst the fandom, same as people speak Elvish and Klingon and every other language in fandom. So, eventually I think that's going to happen and it's going to be fun because we're going to be trying to figure out what it means. And context clues and try and piece it together. Where some people are going to be like he he, and and somebody will translate it on Twitter
We'll
as
be hitting.
Rickrolling. Someone will get Rickrolled with that,
I
and it
was
will be
literally about.
amazing.
I was about to say we're going to be hitting up the message boards and checking out Twitter and seeing if there's anybody that's giving stuff away, and there probably won't. Like we'll have to do a really deep dive to be able to find something like that. But I never considered that really. Like that's an interesting idea, especially considering we now have a precedent of Alice and eavesdropping. That's the third conversation that happens in the Godswood. Is she
We also get
overhears a conversation that she probably shouldn't have overheard.
We also get the establishment of the first Mistress of Whispers.
Yes. Yes.
And that's big.
And I was I was really happy when I figured it out because I started elbowing my fiance and was like, she's like the Varys of this series. She's gone from being a common whore to being a dealer of information. And she was like, "Oh, that's cool." So, like to have these little birdies, starting to appear already in this show, that was really really cool to see because we may not have like a Littlefinger or a Varys, but we have some people that are coming their equivalents, and she may be a prostitute turned info dealer right now, but the precedent is for you to rise up through the ranks with this type of information because 200 years later, the information dealers still counsel.
Yeah, it's a huge thing, and I mean, I think without going too deep into it, this obviously is this is an A1 and done plot line. I'll say that much without saying more. I mean, I'd say that's a fairly safe. Even if you don't know anything, it's a safe bet to make that the little birdies are going to be telling people things. Who they're telling and what they're what they're telling will be the telling thing.
Well, and we could also touch on what they tell because not after Rhaenyra expressing her desire to be free to experience a life other than what is expected of her, like that very night Daemon kind of breaks her out and takes her on
And
an adventure.
that's one thing.
And
I'll say this as a gripe. One thing about that sequence that bugged the crap out of me is Rhaenyra has probably lived in this bedroom for the better part of 10 years. Are you telling me that at no point in her youth did she start pressing on all of the walls and touching everything and not find a hidden pathway out of her, bedroom? Like, I find that very hard to believe that a child did not find that at some point in their youth.
I mean, from my perspective, like obviously, if I was living in a castle, I would be looking for something like that. But that's because like I know medieval lore, and I would want to be like pulling on the books and tipping over the candelabras and things, just to kind of play the trope. But this is basically her house. Like,
I mean, at this point, nobody has
would
sat
you
in
be
King's
checking?
Landing.
Right. And so if this is like a safe haven for her, if this is her house, I guess I'm trying to put myself in her if this is your house that you have been brought up in your whole life, do you have much to go pushing the walls in your childhood home? Like I definitely didn't. I never really tried to push doors around in the house I grew up in.
It's just one of those, like, it would have been different to me if there had have been like a bookcase there or something that she had to move. Because then, hidden behind the bookcase is the pathway out, because it's a safe bet that, if she's being secreted away, there's probably a knight there doing it who could, move the
Hmm.
giant object out of the way. And that is, of course, very common medieval practice. So it just, like, to me, I find it hard to believe that a night table has never had a glass of water knocked off of it or something of that sort, that you see the water just disappear under the wall type situation. I mean, that's just, that's one of my Rhaenyra seems like the type of character who is always exploring. So it's just one of those things. Like I'd imagine she would have found a secret passageway in her bedroom. But I mean, this is King's Landing, so she could have moved bedrooms when she came of age. I have no idea. We don't know how long she's been in that bedroom, so that's just purely me going off down a rabbit hole that really doesn't exist.
Well, what's funny is of all of the things for us to nitpick about this show, we've got all of these dragons, and we've got all of this politicking, and we've got some sort of fantastical stag out in the woods. We've got a tree with a face on it. We've got all of these really fantastical things that go on in this world and in this show. And the thing that bothers us most is the hidden door that the princess never found until tonight. Like, that's such an oddly specific nitpick for a show that has pulled off a lot of really other great things, like crabs feeding on people on beaches. No, never mind that crabs aren't carnivores. Let's talk about this secret tunnel that she apparently never found until now.
I'm not an authority on Westerosi crab. Maybe they are carnivores or scavengers.
Okay, that's fair.
Technically, so, I mean, but I mean, no, that's just one of those. And you're absolutely right. But I mean, it's more of a statement to the good of the series. That's the thing I'm picking on and tearing apart. Like, what? That's unbelievable to me. Everything else, no, that's cool. Godly stags and boars, that's fine. But the princess didn't find
but
a hidden door. I'm offended.
I would defy finding anyone, though, that is an authority on Westerosi crabs. Is there anybody out there?
I mean, I'm going to assume George, and that's
are
about
crabs
it.
in your world? In your
Westeros
world,
crabs are carnivores. Yes.
Oh, let's talk about some of the sights and smells and sounds that Rhaenyra got to experience on this outing, because there were a lot of very new things that she experienced, and I think she kind of got a little bit of a high on the freedom. And even though things didn't go all the way with Daemon in this episode, I found it interesting that she had such an adrenaline and endorphin rush from the players, from the food, from the music, that that experience didn't scar her. It made her want to go home and like find somebody to help her finish the job, basically.
It sort of closed one of those loopholes that the lore creates, because in the lore, historically, we never knew, Rhaenyra's love life to a certain point. We knew certain people, we knew certain events, and things like that. But one of the big ones was in regards to her, her maiden status. Now that was always the big question of who actually got her maidenhead. And in the lore, that was always a big question. And there's a large group of people who always said it was Daemon. Daemon did it when she was 16 years old, and they had a torrid love affair in King's Landing, and eventually she seduced Sir Criston Cole. Now other people read the books, and it makes a point of saying Daemon taught her how to seduce, and he did by seducing her without finishing.
Mm-hmm.
They went to third base, but they didn't quite go home. And then she went home and went home with Sir Criston Cole. So it answered that question in a way that satisfies the lore while answering a question, at least to me. So I enjoyed that a great deal. It satisfied the lore, expounded on it, and satisfied it.
See, and that's a phrase that is very open to interpretation, and they interpreted it in a way that answers both questions simultaneously. Not having that I will admit that I felt like the scene dragged on quite a bit more than I expected it to. There was a lot of horny, there was a lot of seducing, there was a lot of different cleverly disguised pieces of camera work in order to show a lot of fucking. And I was like, oh, this is probably the longest scene that we've ever gotten in Game of Thrones. Like, straight up, anything else that we've gotten from Missandei and Grey Worm, from Jon and Daenerys, from whoever. I don't think a scene with horny tensions, whether it's from Daemon and Rhaenyra to Rhaenyra and Sir Criston, like those scenes basically go back to back. So I kind of put it together into like one really
Yeah,
drawn out sequence of events.
I mean, you're not wrong if you're combining the two as one long event, which, to be fair, is accurate. I mean, with the exception of Rhaenyra leaving the pleasure house and calling for Daemon by name in the streets of Westeros. Really smart move for someone who's trying to be incognito. But if you sort of get past that in a way that you just feel it's like one long sequence, then yeah, you're probably right. I mean, I definitely learned more about how uh, guard armor is effective, than I ever thought I'd need to know. Watching her de-armor, like that was like just like it's one of those scenes you're watching and it's like, is this supposed to be arousing? What am I supposed to be feeling right now? It was awkward.
Yeah, it was a lot of awkward mental boners going on. I don't think there was ever a physical one, at least not on mine, but like just the awkward nature of how they were supposed to make this stuff with Rhaenyra and Daemon seem like it was organic and natural and okay. And then the supposed foreplay with her and Sir Criston, like I even like I kind of scooched away from my fiance a little bit during those scenes because I was like, this is not sexy. This is not sexy like at all. It was very awkward. It was very drawn out, and I
And
think
yet it
that's
was
kind of
much
what it
more.
was supposed to be.
I mean, I don't disagree. I mean, it definitely it was pure unadulterated lust. It wasn't.
Hmm.
It wasn't loving. It wasn't emotion. It was just pure unadulterated lust. And if you transpose that with the actual love we're supposed to be seeing with the king and Alicent, which happened almost simultaneously. I mean, I suppose it was the same night. Just
Yeah,
like that one. Just oh no, no.
I mean, I mean, all of the scars and the sores that you see
The
on his
open
back,
lesions.
and
Oh,
yeah, yeah, after a few years, I could see why Alicent would just kind of be laying there with her arms out the way that she was. She was just like, yeah, okay, let's get this over with. Like, I think to a certain extent, maybe she feels a little done with expectations too, but I think she also feels a little trapped. Like,
oh,
I
definitely.
think Rhaenyra kind of zinged her a little bit. Rhaenyra kind of zinged her a little bit, talking about how you're trapped in a castle and made to pump out heirs. Like that's basically what her life has been
Mhm.
resigned to at this point.
Yeah, I mean, very much so. I mean, obviously we only saw one of the kids at this point, so we saw the second child. We never saw
Mhm.
Aegon in this episode. We just saw, to this point, the unnamed segment. I don't even think they've said the kid's name, have they?
I don't think they said it out loud in the show. Is there any reference to this child in the lore?
Well, I mean, we do know, the kid's names, and the second child was Aemond, but I don't think we ever heard the name in the episode.
I don't believe it was said because it really the only sequence that we have is with her trying to calm the kid down, and she
Mhm.
doesn't like address the
The
child by
actual,
name. So
an actual name dropping. We get Prince Aegon name dropped in the Mummers play before we get to the Pleasure House, but other than that, none of the princes' names are mentioned by anyone other than the Mummers play.
Right. Right. I got to mention the play really quickly before we go to the report by Otto, because by the time Game of Thrones happens, like with the Starks and the Lannisters and the Targaryens and all of them, by the time we get around to there, people like Arya wanting to explore what it means to be a traveling performer. So you fast forward 170 years, and they're finally advanced enough to have women performers. In this one, it's all dudes. And it's really, really weird watching a dude in a dress give birth to a doll. Like, that
You're
was
not wrong.
not something I
It
was
was very
not
Shakespearean to
prepared for
me, right? Like knowing ancient literature, that Shakespeare's plays were performed by men pretending to be women.
that.
Like that's
Hmm.
accurate, and I guess Westeros transformed a lot in 170 some years, a much faster pace than the real world did, I guess. But yeah, it
Hmm.
was definitely
I wonder
awkward.
how long it took.
Budgets have gone up too.
How long? Hmm. Yeah, that's true. That is true. Um, but I think it's also interesting that even in this time and in the times to come, there's a lot of social commentary that goes on in the streets
Mhm.
from the players and the jeers of the crowds. You get kind of a very easy and very straightforward understanding of how the mass populace feels about the ones in power, just from how they respond to the plays that are going on, rather than having to
Yeah.
do like interviews in individual houses or have individual conversations with people. It's almost like a shortcut where you get to see how the common folk feel about those power without having to actually have scene by scene almost interviews to get their feelings about it. And this is something that both shows have done now, and both of them have done it well, I think.
Yeah, no, I mean you're absolutely right. That scene is very important, not just for painting the image of what the general populace thinks, but it's Rhaenyra learning the importance of that. You know, she makes a point when she says, I don't care what they think. And
Hmm.
Daemon schools her in the art of diplomacy. If you want to sit on the Iron Throne, you have to care what they think. It's an interesting nugget of wisdom in and amongst a whole bunch of awkward debauchery.
And I think that's the interesting dynamic between them is you really don't know yet. Like I've done some reading online, but you don't really know yet what this relationship is shaping up to be, what it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
But we do know that when Damon gets back, he proposes marriage. He
Hmm.
says the two of us can bring the House of the Dragon back to its former glory. And just based on what I've read and based on how he sounded, I don't think he was all that insincere in the pitch that he was making. I think he cares enough about his brother that he would try to care for his brother's daughter. And I think he does care enough of the house that this is something that he would rather do than fulfill, social contract obligations to out in the Vale.
Yeah, it definitely paints the picture of Damon. We get to see more of behind the curtain of how Damon operates. It's the first time we see him and Rainier. They make a point of acknowledging they've matured. He's matured in the 4 years, she said. So that this puts this a year after the last episode. 'Cause, I mean, obviously he's gone through the haircut.
Yeah, I believe so because the hunt's the second name day, and I think the prince is 3 at this point.
Yeah, so I mean, because he says they say it's been 4 years since they were on the bridge to Dragonstone, and that was right before the start of the Stepstone War. So 4 years makes sense. And obviously, he changed his hair. I don't like it. I don't. Short-haired Targaryen does not do it for me. I mean, I'll say that I'll die on that hill. Targaryen's long hair, shoulder length at least. That no, don't like it.
Is there some kind of significance to cutting your hair? Like, is
No,
it supposed to symbolize or?
I mean only in and amongst the
Okay.
Dothraki. That's the only cultural
Mm-hmm.
significance of hair that we've seen. In and amongst the world of Game of Thrones. So no, I mean it's not even in the lore or anything that there's a reason for it. Everyone just assumed he had the long Targaryen hair all the way through. Like fan art is a real thing out there, and Daemon on his at his wedding and later events all painted with long hair. So I don't know. You better grow it out again, or I'm gonna be upset. I don't like the short
It
hair. Doesn't
might have
it just doesn't
phased.
look
Well,
right?
okay, but there is a picture out there somewhere. One of the original, I want to say like original photos or something like that, that they rolled very very early on, shows him with Emma Darcy, and in that image, his hair is longer again. So, I think it is a phase, but no telling how long that phase will last. So, I kind of see the efficiency standpoint behind it from like when you're in battle, you don't want it to get snagged on anything or have it be that an opponent could grab onto in hand-to-hand combat. Like, I kind of get it, but this is supposed to be a time of peace. So I I don't know.
I mean, he is just returning from war, though, right? Like, so he is coming back from annihilating all of the, uh, all of the people and being named king of the Narrow Sea. So, you know,
Hmm.
I mean, it is interesting, and you're right. We do see him in later images with Emma Darcy where he does have the long hair. So, it's I can deal with short hair for an episode, I guess. I just don't have to like it.
An episode, maybe two, depending how much of a time jump we get. But we'll we'll see next week, I suppose. Um, On to like the last one or two scenes of this episode, and then into final thoughts. There's a big conversation that happens between Otto and King Viserys, which then leads to a conversation
I mean, a
between
couple.
Viserys and Rhaenyra. Yeah, there's a couple of big conversations. I guess there's like four really important, like in the last 10 to 15 minutes of this episode, and it's all about the wheels turning. It's all about is this going to create a scandal? Is this going to sully the name of the king and the princess and the alliance? And do you trust me, father? All this sort of stuff.
Mhm.
Um, found it very interesting how Rhaenyra kind of almost got on the defensive. Like she got really defensive around Allison, and then almost got even more defensive around her dad in the ensuing conversations, which kind of confuses me from like the receiving end of that. If I was getting such a vocal and defensive rebuttal, I would have suspected that she had something to hide, but
Well,
both of them
clearly,
kind of took her at her word.
I'll point out one very thing that patently takes that assessment and says you are wrong. I'm going to say two words: Moon T. That right there says Viserys does not believe a word she said. Not fully, not wholeheartedly.
Mm.
Like he does not. He has some distrust there, enough to the point that he believes that she is engaging in sexual relations with someone. And whether or
Yeah.
not he believes that to be Daemon, I don't know. But he does not believe she will be virtuous on her wedding day.
Yeah, the tea was interesting because the framing that Maester Melos uses was just so I don't know, clever, so
Yeah.
deliberate that it's like this is what it is. Don't make me say it out loud, kind of
Yeah.
thing. And Otto was kind of the same way. He's like, "Your Grace, are you really going to say it out loud?" And Viserys was like, "You're in my bedchamber. You came to me with this. You better finish the goddamn sentence that you started if you're going to be coming to me and making these kind of accusations."
I loved that whole sequence. Like during that entirety of Otto coming in all, I hate to be the one to tell you this, might your grace. And I'm like, bullshit, you're loving it. You are loving every second of this because it pushes your agenda further, except it's about to blow up in your face in a very big way and you don't see it coming. This is amazing.
I loved the way that it blew up in his face, and honestly, it's a product of Viserys actually listening to his daughter for like the first time in any of their conversations in this show. Like he actually listens to her and heeds her advice, and after all of the previous conversations defending Otto, he finally recognizes that maybe he can't take him at his word anymore. And
He realizes the truth
the the
of
the
other actions and acts, because
Mhm.
Viserys finally realizes that Alicent doesn't come to me then on her own. That's not what happened. He figures out the game and realizes that, oh my god, I've been played. And I've been played for a fool.
Mhm. Mhm.
And you sort of see that moment where
He
he
he got he got he
realizes
got played.
this. You can see when he starts realizing this in the conversations he has with the characters. He starts putting everything together and realizes, oh, you've stopped pushing the crown and you're pushing yourself. That's not cool. It's the most kingly thing Viserys has ever
I
done. I'll say that.
Mhm. He does the two most kings. The first one was when he kicks his brother when he's down. Like he actually committed some sort of physical act against his brother in the throne room, which I was by. And then he makes a kingly act and a kingly decision to remove Otto from service, which are two really big moments in this show because this is a place that I don't know what's going on in the lore. I don't know um, what could end up happening next. And in the first episode, Damon makes a pitch to be the hand out of Otto, but I don't think Viserys trusts him enough to do that. So there is a very interesting vacancy that could be filled 3 or 4 people for that position of Hand of the King, and I don't know which direction it'll go, and that is, like, the one thing that I'm really looking forward to seeing the most, in future episodes, and you're over there laughing because you do know who it'll be, and it's
I
probably
do.
not any of the people I'm thinking of, so that'll that
I mean,
that'll
I,
be
I don't
that'll be
know who
fun
you're
for
thinking.
me and for the com
uh, I'm not going to say anything.
there's
But I mean, to me, this
that's
whole sort
fine.
of compound, like the relationship compounded in a great way because it finally, to me, the moment that I think everything blew up in Otto's face was when Viserys realized that you have actively turned me against my own blood. Because at every step
Mhm.
of the way, everywhere, Otto has been. Daemon's not good for this. Daemon's a bad. Daemon's bad. Blood bad. Blood bad. Don't trust your brother. You can't trust your brother. You can't trust your own blood. He's your heir, and you can't trust him. He's unqualified to be master of coin. He can't be what's the second one? He can't be the master of laws. He will, be a horrible person for that. Let's make him the city guard. And that blew up in their face because the city guard is loyal to Daemon, as proven on the bridge of Dragonstone, where, half the king's guard was standing on his side, or half the city guard was on his side. He has actively painted Viserys against Daemon at every step of the way, and now he has gone so far to the extreme act of accusing Daemon of defiling his daughter, and he believes it. and openly, attacks Daemon in the throne room. And I think that's the only reason Daemon doesn't do anything, because, he understands, the anger and the hatred in this. Like, he thinks I defiled his daughter. And in reality, from Daemon, it's, I love her. You're painting an image that's dirty and wrong. And for Daemon, it's about love. And he showed that all the way back in episode 1 when he put that necklace around her neck. You could see the emotion in his actions and in the way he's reacted to her and spoken to her. And then again at the funeral pyre for her mother. And you see all these little glimpses into Daemon actually caring for her in a way that he's hurt and offended that his brother is actively accusing him of doing this and just lets it happen. And I think that's part of it, because I think in the back of Viserys' mind knows that Daemon's not fighting back. That's not Daemon. I've actually wounded him. Not physically, but emotionally. I'm the one delivering the blows. And now here, your own daughter is telling me you're lying to me, that this didn't happen. My daughter is telling me this didn't happen. Now there's a problem. And, he takes the pin off his chest, and just a beautifully poignant moment as king. And that's the first moment where you see him sort of as a king. And then you follow that up with you're marrying Rhaenyra. Laenor. God, I'll get it right eventually. When he tells Rhaenyra she's marrying Laenor. That's it. Done. End of discussion. You're solving my problems now.
Mm-hmm.
He's finally looking like a king.
At one point he says something like, "You are my political headache."
Exactly. Which to that point she was, to a certain degree, going off on this tour of force to find a husband. And, it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out.
I these last 15, 20 minutes were really important for a lot of different aspects of character development. Alicent vouching for Rhaenyra helping Viserys realize that Otto's no good. Otto trying to maintain his, but probably taking things a little too far with the report that he gave. This proposal, the politicking of trying to get back on the Valerian's good side. There's a lot that happens in this last bit as a result of that uncomfortable to watch scene that happens in the middle of the episode. So I think this episode's really, really important, and that's a really tough thing to say from someone who is, I wouldn't call myself like conservative, but maybe old school. Like there's just a lot of traditional values that I prefer to adhere to at times, and I wasn't super comfortable watching those really dragged out scenes, but I recognize their importance, and those were some really important sequences that are knocking down some really, really big dominoes. They're going to have really big payoffs in the weeks to come, and I'm really pissed, not really pissed, kind of pissed that I'm not going to be around to talk about those episodes, because after tonight I'm going on a honeymoon, and I'll be watching those episodes from way out of state. I'm not going to be anywhere near decent enough Wi-Fi, and I'm not going to be podcasting from my honeymoon anyways. So, I know we were short of people tonight. If those people can't make it next week, it may just be down to you, Johnny, to talk about this episode, because I ain't even going to be here next week.
Well, if there's one thing we've learned in the last, at this point, I think I've known you for 5-6 years, something like that.
Yeah,
fair bit. That I can talk a lot, so I can carry a discussion. But
I did want to give our friend Sean's thoughts. He gave me like a one little paragraph blurb, and this will be a good way to get into our final thoughts and our champions of the week and all that good stuff as we get ready to. He says that he feels this is the best episode yet in terms of character development. It was an episode that thrived having a woman in the director's chair. That's a point that we hadn't even made yet, but it's a very, very important point. Claire Kilner was the director for this episode, and he says that it thrived with her in that position. Driven content was shot a much classier, much more cinematic way than in Game of Thrones. It's not my favorite episode, but I loved how different Daemon and Rhaenyra's chemistry on, and I'm absolutely loving these years thus far. 8 out of 10, he says. For all of the fantastic descriptions and the how much stuff, he still only gave it an 8.
I mean, he has been much more judicial with his scores this season. I'll give him that. He probably remembers what happened during the Game of Thrones last couple seasons where we were throwing out 9 point somethings and realizing, oh, crap, I've ruined my own scale.
That's
it is
definitely
interesting.
something that I was guilty of.
I think we all were to a certain degree, looking back on it. So we're all sort of playing a bit more tight with our ratings, and it's enjoyable. It's fun. It does paint an interesting picture. He points out, the director, and it sets an interesting tone because this was a very political sort of episode, more story driven, and she is the director of the penultimate episode of this first season, which is typically the the hard action episode. So I don't know. Maybe we're gonna change the Game of Thrones format, and the finale is going to be the big action piece because the director of that is Greg Yaitans, who directed the last episode in the Stepstones. I don't know. We'll see.
Time will tell, and I'll definitely be back in time for that. I think I'm only missing 5 and 6, and then I'll be back for 7 through 10. So I'll definitely be around for the tail end and for those bigger discussions. But I'm gonna definitely do like maybe a brief 20-minute standalone episode, just talking about my thoughts on some of these previous episodes that I'll end up missing because there's going to be quite a bit. Kim's also directing the next episode. We Light the in addition to the penultimate, so it could be a little bit more politicking going on in this next episode. But judging by the preview, and I'm not going to spoil the episode 5 preview, but just judging from what I saw from that, there may be a bit more than just character development in that 5th episode.
It'll be interesting, to say the least, when we actually get to sit down and watch this next episode on Sunday night.
Yeah, somebody better be around to be on and talk about it with you, because it ain't gonna be me. But let's go ahead and get into our final thoughts, our scores, and our champions. I too enjoyed this episode and the character development and the payoff at the end of the episode. Those last 10 to 15 minutes, you could really see everything in motion. You could really see some of the important stuff happening. And I'm going to give the champion of the week to Viserys. He actually made important decisions that for the good of the realm and were centric to his family. And I think making those decisions and even giving the tea to Rhaenyra and making the Desault Laenor Velaryon, removing Otto as the hand, he did right things based on the potential repercussions of the scandal and was doing things for the good of the realm and for the good of his family. So he would be my champion, but I may end up copying Sean's answer. I really want to give this an 8.5 out of 10. But I feel like there's still better on the horizon, and I don't want to overscore just yet. So it's kind of in like that 8 to 8.25 region for me in this episode. I enjoyed it a lot, but I'm trying not to enjoy it too much just yet, as I think there's still a lot better to come. So if the rest of the season ends up, I may go back and retroactively change this to an 8.5. Don't think that's going to happen. So I'm going to hold steady at an 8 for this week.
Well, I'm still going to be judicial. I think I've pretty much been in the same place for every episode so far, and that's 8.5. if it's an 8, then we can retroactively change that. I think I'm 8.5 across the board so far for all 4 of the first episodes. So I'm going to stick there, and same with you. Say that it's good, it's fun. It probably is my favorite episode so far because it is so well. There's so much more emotion, there's so much more passion, so much more of everything going on that makes this fandom, this franchise, what it is, and we got to see a lot of that, and I'm enjoying it. My champion of the episode is tough. This is probably the most hotly contested episode because for me there's three ways you can take it. Obviously Viserys is an option for all of the reasons you just said. Um, Also Rhaenyra, another great episode from her. We getting to see sort of the princess learning about the realities of the world she lives in, and pushing forward her own agenda and her story, and realizing that marriage doesn't have to it sounds horrible, but this is Game of Thrones, but she's realizing that marriage doesn't have to be a handcuff for her own ambitions, and she's playing the game a bit better, and you see her, and Alicent sort of you know almost come to a detente in a certain sort of way, when she swears on her mother, and Alicent, believes her. That's the important thing, is that she believed it. And, she went from
Mhm.
believing her father to believing Alicent was definitely a huge change in Alicent's character. Because to this point she's been her father's creature, and now she's finally becoming her own. That's important, but not important enough to put her in the running for champion. The third option is Daemon, because you got to see all of the multiple sides of Daemon Targaryen. You got to see the arguably one of the best players of the game we've seen to date in Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon. By coming in and swearing fealty and giving his crown to the king and playing the game, and reestablishing his place in King's Landing, and then you get to see the more fun side of Damon, who plays fast and loose with the rules, and goes out in hiding with Rhaenyra and takes her to the pleasure house and to the mummers play and all of those things, and you know quietly seduces her, and and walks away. Like, that's the weird part. Like, that seems so different from Damon, and is part of the reason that paints the picture of their relationship in such a specific way, because he walks away. Because in Alicent's eyes, or not in Alicent's eyes, but in Rhaenyra's moment, it was purely about passion. It was purely about fulfilling and slaking your lust. Whereas for Damon, it was not. Doing it for those reasons were not the reasons that Damon could deal with. And you got to see that third side of Damon, who was the Targaryen. You got to see when he has that moment with Viserys in the throne room, and Viserys, ends up on top of him and berates him, and he, sort of in a roundabout fashion professes his love for Rhaenyra and asks for her hand, and does all of the things that make Daemon special. So for me, it's Daemon Targaryen, because you got to see all sides of Daemon, and I realize it's sort of almost anticlimactic at this point that Daemon has been my choice in most of the episodes so far, but it just, again, it just, to this point, he has been the most intriguing character, because we've seen so many sides of Daemon. We've seen the game player, we've seen the war general, we've seen the fighter, we've seen the lover. We're seeing all sides of a very multifaceted character being performed phenomenally by a phenomenal actor.
What's really interesting is the previous episode we see Damon the warrior, and in this
Mhm.
one we get to see a more vulnerable Damon.
Mhm.
And to me, that just exhibits fantastic range by Matt Smith.
Yes.
Like, I knew that he was a good actor, obviously, from watching him in Doctor Who, and then
Mhm.
I heard he did pretty well in The Crown, but I never watched it. Um, but this is a great opportunity for him to express what he's truly capable of, and I think he is flexing his muscles truly, truly well. in its first season, and I'm here for it. Um, I personally feel like there's going to be other episodes that I'm going to be claiming as my champion, and I've got to give it to others when and where I can, because I feel like the second half of the season he's going to be getting it a whole lot more, and so I think I'm just giving it to Viserys almost as a courtesy to some of the other actors and some of the other characters, because Damon could very easily steal the show. I'm just trying to find ways to make sure that it's not hero worship,
It's not
I
nearly
guess
as
is the word.
one-sided.
I
Yeah,
don't know for sure.
that
Yeah,
makes perfect sense.
yeah,
You know, you
basically.
want to sort of pass it around while you know that you can, because you're expecting so much more from him in the future, and that's viable. I think, without saying much, I think that's part of the reason why I'm not giving it to Rhaenyra early, because I expect so much more from this character going forward that you know it's not there yet, despite the phenomenal performance by Millie Alcock.
She has been a shining star that I think a lot of people have been pleasantly surprised by and are going to be somewhat disappointed when we do the time. There have been a lot of pictures going around social media that show Millie Alcock when she was younger, looking a lot like Emma Darcy when she was a teenager. And so, well, hello there. Hi. Don't really know what happened there. Um, but there were plenty of videos that showed Emma Darcy as a teenager, and so bringing her into is I would hope a benefit, but I guess time will tell, and it's time. Within the next couple episodes, we're gonna see how well the casting of those two Rhaenyras was. So that'll be a fun time. And this was a fun time. Aside from having that logo slapped in my face for a few seconds there, this has been a real fun episode talking about number number 4, the King of the Narrow Sea. Um, Johnny, I know it was a more private conversation tonight, but I appreciate you being a part of the fun. Where can the folks at home keep up with you when we're not having episodes like this?
Oh man, you can find me Tuesday nights on the regularly scheduled Fandom Empire uh, show. You can also find me at Bros Poor Pros on Twitch. We're grinding towards that affiliate number, so you can catch me over there, streaming mostly through the week. Monday through Thursday, typically at around 10-11 p.m. So head over there, drop me a follow, and help me grind towards that affiliate rank.
Considering the topic that we just discussed tonight, I don't know if I want to grind anything anytime soon, but people can go and follow your account anyways. Thanks to
I mean,
everyone that
I
tuned
know
in
someone
to
who
this
might.
episode.
I know someone who might not like to hear that, but
Who might-
well, it's not
Okay.
me. But I'm gonna guess your fiance might have some issues if you decide to, you know, abscond from
Probably.
certain expected activities in the near future.
Not going down that road. I'm gonna go ahead and show this graphic now. Be sure to go follow House of the Empire on all of our different platforms. Phantom Empire, hit that like and comment and subscribe button. We appreciate everybody being a part of this stream this evening. As he mentioned, there's the regularly scheduled Phantom Empire show, and if you join Patreon, there's a lot of really great exclusives over there as well. So be sure to go and hit up all different pieces so that you are in the know, more or less, for all of the really great content that happens here on this channel. Comment, subscribe, and tune in to future episodes. This has been a really fun one, and I'm glad that I got to have one little send off before we called it for me. Just really excited about the events to come, personal life, and then podcast. It should be fun. I'm also a high school football broadcasts for a local high school team here in the Dallas area. Want to hear me do football play-by-play? You can go find my social media at Zach the Voice. Obviously, I'm not doing a game this Friday because I'm going to be a little late, but around the same time that I come back to the Empire, I'll also be back on the call for football as well. But I think that is officially going to do it for this episode of House of the Empire, not House of the Dragon. This is a House of the Dragon discussion. I'll get it right one days. But for Johnny and Sean and Kieran and everybody that helps make this show possible, I'm Zach Arnold saying thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next time when the Empire returns.